This video is made possible by Eagle. Stick around to learn more. Hey, it's Jake, and in this video I'm going to walk you through my process for designing a character inside of Illustrator that I can then rig and animate using Duik inside of After Effects. I feel like I need to start this video by saying that I am not an illustrator, and I don't even consider myself to be a good character designer, but I still need to be able to design characters every now and then for projects in After Effects. And along the years that I've been doing this, I've come up with a pretty good method for creating characters inside of Illustrator or Photoshop that work well with rigs inside of After Effects, whether it's with Duik or another rigging system. And since I don't consider myself to be a good illustrator, I almost always pull reference from other really good artists who actually know what they're doing with character designs. And I don't try to rip them off by any means, but I pull a lot of inspiration from a lot of different sources to help guide what my character might look like. And after doing this process enough times, I've come up with a pretty good checklist of things you should consider before you start actually designing your character. First, think about what you're going to be using this character rig for. Does it need to be a full body rig that allows you to do a walk cycle and a big range of movement with maybe multiple poses and a head rig? Or is this going to be a very simple rig where you're only going to see the character from the waist up? Or maybe it's just going to be a walk cycle and nothing else. Knowing how this rig is going to be used is going to determine how much effort you need to put into the actual artwork and prep work for getting it to be rigged inside of After Effects. A simpler rig isn't going to need as much detail in all of the joints and extra layers and maybe foot bending. So that's always the first thing that I think of. For the character I'm going to design in this video, I know that I only want to use it for a walk cycle, and I want to do it from the side. I want to do a 90-degree straight looking forward walk cycle that's just really simple, not a lot of range of movement. I just want to be able to make this character walk. If you want to do a little bit more with your rig, you might consider doing a 3/4 pose, which is what I would typically do because you can convincingly make it look like the character is looking around the scene, and you can also do a walk cycle to the left or right. And obviously, if this is going to be a character that you use in a variety of ways, you're going to need to rig the character in multiple poses, forward-facing and probably even rear-facing. But my character is just going to be one pose from the side for a walk cycle. Another thing to think about is what style of rig you want this to be. Do you want the limbs to be super bendy and rubber hosey, or do you want them to be more rigid? And if they are rigid, do you want those limbs to be able to stretch at all to be a little bit more cartoony, or do you want them to stay realistically the same length like your actual arms would? For my character, again, I'm going to keep it very simple. I don't want any rubber hose bendiness. I want it to be very rigid, and I don't need any stretching. So I'm not going to be involving the puppet tool, which just adds another layer of things that you have to think about when you go to rig inside of After Effects. But just doing this little bit of pre-planning beforehand, before you get into actually sketching something out, really will help you decide what level of detail you need, what range of motion this character needs to have, and how many little details you need to put into the artwork in order to get the rig to work inside of After Effects. My character design is going to be very simple. It doesn't need a lot of range of movement. It just needs to be able to bend the arms and the hands, the feet, legs, head, neck, and that will pretty much get the job done. Now that I know these little details about my character, I can move on to finding some inspiration and reference for actually designing my own character. Now, where you find your inspiration is completely up to you. I tend to like to go to websites like Dribbble and Behance and even Instagram because I can follow a lot of people there. I can find new artists on all these websites, and it's really easy to be able to just search for new things. So here on Dribbble, I'm just going to search for character design and see what comes up. And by default, Dribble's going to give me what's popular, what's getting the most likes, but I tend to like to sort by new and noteworthy so that I can see new and noteworthy designs, things that other people may not have seen. And just scrolling down here, I'm seeing some really cool character illustrations. Let's take a look at this one. This one's super cool. I love all of the texture and the line work. The character's pose just has a lot of attitude, and the overall design style is just really cool. So now that I've found something that I liked, I need to be able to gather it somehow to be able to reference it along with other inspiration as I start to design my own character. And that leads me to the sponsor of this video, which is Eagle. Eagle is a desktop app that is an amazing tool for organizing your reference, inspiration, and even design assets. This is my personal library in Eagle of just reference and inspiration and even design assets, but I want to show you how quickly I can import something from Dribbble into Eagle. All I have to do is use the browser extension, right-click on the image and say Save Image to Eagle, and it automatically pulls it into my app. It gives it the same title that it has on Dribbble, and if we look over here in the metadata, it even pulls in the URL for that image, so I don't even have to think about where did I get this reference from. It's already there. It saves me so much time with how quickly I can pull in references. And one of my favorite things about this app is how searchable it is and how easily you can organize your assets. So I'm just going to press T to bring up the tags, and Eagle's going to suggest a bunch of tags based on what was in Dribbble, but I've made a couple of my own custom ones, so I'm going to call this 2D, character design. There's texture in it, so I'll tag it texture, and we'll call that good. Now over here on the Smart Folder section, I've set up some of these folders that are based on certain rules. Like if I go to my character design folder, anything that I've tagged character design will show up in this folder, and you can be super customizable with what gets pulled in. So I have a typography folder, gradients, textures, and I even have an animation folder. And what I love about this is that you can actually pull in URLs from videos, and they're going to show up as embedded video players directly in the app. No need to go to the URL, even though it is stored right here in the metadata, but you can quickly get a preview of it just by hovering your mouse over, and you can double click to get inside of it to quickly view all of your references. And there are just so many other little things that I love about this, like GIF playback. I can press spacebar to see it full resolution. I can zoom in and out with my scroll wheel, and it even pulls in colors from the design. So I could click on this yellow and say find similar color items, and it found that same color in this URL. It's just a fantastic organization tool. Let's jump back into Dribbble and see if we can find some more references. I want to show you just how quickly I can pull in some more. So this one's really cool. I'm just going to use the keyboard shortcut of Alt right click, and that pulls it straight into Eagle for me. This one's pretty cool. I don't even have to think about where these are coming from or if I'm gonna need to remember who designed these, because it's gonna pull all of that information into Eagle for me. Now let's do the same thing over on Behance. I'm gonna search for character design one more time and see what comes up. This one looks really cool. It has a lot of examples. So it's a character illustration, flat character mood version. Very cool. I'm just gonna Alt right click on this. And this is really great because it's a lot of variety of poses, and it's just really great reference. This is even really good to see the proportions and in considering the scale of your character's body. Oh, and I really like this one because it's showing multiple poses of the same character design. All right, I'm gonna jump back into Eagle and just select all of those that I just pulled in and quickly tag all of them at once. Character design, character, all of those are 2D. And now that those are all tagged, I can go straight to my character design folder and see all of my references at once. And this is just scratching the surface of what Eagle is capable of. I use it all the time in my workflow now. I'm never looking back, and I really wish I would have known about it sooner. So if you want to learn more about it, check the link in the description. And a huge thank you to Eagle for sponsoring this video. Now, as you can see, I've done a lot of research prior to recording this video, and I want to bring attention to this one artist that I really enjoyed. I love the line work that this artist put in, and let's jump over to their Dribbble account just so we can give them some credit. This artist goes by Julia. Make sure you go follow her. But I just love this character design, and I've pulled in a few references from this same artist so that I can refer to them. I just love the way that the characters flow. I love the way that she handled the eyeballs. The hands are really big. I like the exaggerated proportions of some of the body parts. So I think that's gonna be something that I pull from heavily in my own character design. Another reference that I really liked was right here. I like the color palette of this design. I love the way that they did the shading with the really harsh shadows. And again, I really like these exaggerated proportions with the really tall, skinny legs. So now I feel like I have enough inspiration to pull from. I'm gonna make my Illustrator document and get that set up. I'm gonna create a new document, and I'll just start with the web large preset and click create. Now, when you're designing a full body character for rigging in After Effects, it's very important to design it very large. Don't think about this as vector artwork that you're gonna turn on the continuously rasterize and then just scale it up to whatever size you want. That's going to break your rig. You need to work at a very high resolution so that you can crop in to just the chest if you need to and still have it be nice and clear. None of that anti-aliasing fuzziness. So this HD frame is actually nowhere near the size that I need it to be. So I'm gonna go to my artboard tool, and up here under my artboard width and height, I'm gonna change this to probably 6,000 by 6,000. And you might think that is absolutely crazy, Jake, what are you doing? But think of this as the composition inside of After Effects. The artboard is the composition. My character rig is going to need space for the arms to go all the way out, up, without exiting that composition. So I need a ton of room, and it's okay that it's this big. With all of that now taken care of, I can pull in my references from Eagle, and I'll show you how easy that is. I'm just gonna click and drag, switch over to Illustrator, and drag and drop. It's that easy to bring in a reference. So I'm going to quickly just pull in all of my references before I start designing. All right, so I have my references lined up here on the left side, and I'm probably going to be pulling most heavily from these two, the overall design style. I just really love this illustration style. But I also like to see these other references, just the way that this character is posed. Super long legs, again, that's something that I want to do. The way these shadows are appearing on different parts of the body. I really like the colors from these characters, and this one is really great just to see a variety of handling hair and in different ways of the head being rotated. So it's all just really great reference to have on hand right at the side of my artboard. Now I'm going to go right into my layers panel and just start labeling things. This first one is going to be my reference. So just label it like that, and I'm going to lock the layer so I don't accidentally move any of them around. Then I'll make a new layer. The first thing that I want to consider is the proportions of the character. So I'm just going to start by making a perfect circle using the ellipse tool to make a head. And that's way bigger than it needs to be, but I'm going to get the fill to be black, take off of that stroke. I don't need it. And then I'll just scale this down quite a bit. Now I do have smart guides enabled, which I recommend a lot. If you go up to the view menu and then down to smart guides, that's just gonna make aligning things a lot easier. The keyboard shortcut is Control or Command U to turn that on and off. And I do that frequently for when I don't want things to snap. Okay, so let's pretend that's the head, and then I'm going to make a rectangle for the torso of the character, just to drag that out to be roughly the size that I'm thinking. And then just duplicate that with the selection tool. Hold down Option or Alt while clicking and dragging to make a duplicate. And I again want to exaggerate the proportions, so I'm gonna make this really long. So tall legs, and then just play around with the placement. So maybe the head is a little bit closer to the shoulders. And from here I can start playing around with these proportions to get something that I like a little bit more. So maybe these legs need to be a little bit longer. Now I realize this is really simple. There's nothing to it other than a circle and a couple of rectangles, but it's giving me a good visual reference for the proportions. I could completely change this up if I made the torso a whole lot longer and gave them much stumpier legs. Or maybe I want to do something where I make the torso a lot wider and the head bigger with tiny legs, or taper the legs. Just using a couple of basic shapes will really give you a lot of possibilities and a pretty good idea of what your character will look like before you've added any kind of detail. So make sure that you're pretty happy with the way that your proportions are laid out before you move on to actually styling the design. I think the head needs to be slightly larger, so I'm gonna make that a little bit bigger, and then just add a little bit more detail, like say the feet. So I'm gonna duplicate this rectangle right here, just scale it down so that it's more of a foot shape, and align it like that. Now with that, I think I'm pretty happy with the proportions of the character. Now I'm gonna go ahead and rename this layer and just call it Proportions. And then select everything in it, make it a nice bright, maybe cyan color. So it's kind of like a guide. And that way, visually, this is just kind of like a guide for my actual design, which I'm gonna do on a different layer. So I'll just make a new layer, and this is where I'll actually start sketching. So when I say sketch, I'm not actually using a tablet or anything like that. I'm simply just gonna grab the brush tool, set it to be black, and use my mouse to sketch something out really loosely. Remember, this is not something that I'm planning on being 100% perfect vector. I want it to look a little bit more hand done. I want it to have some line work to it. And at this point, I'm just sketching it out, and I'll be modifying it later using the pen tool. So the head shape is going to be pretty circular, but I'm imagining that it's gonna need a little bit of a chin, obviously, since this is a 90-degree pose, as well as a nose. So with the default brush enabled on that brush tool, I'm just gonna quickly grab something that looks like that, maybe for a nose, and then use that circle kind of as a guide and give it maybe a little bit more of a chin here. I'm not worried about how this actually looks. I'm just trying to build out a little bit more of some form for the character. So maybe something like that. And actually the nose can be even further out because this is directly from the side. So it's probably gonna be aligned right to the edge of the head there. And then I'll just give him some hair up here. I don't know what that's gonna look like yet, but that's the extent of my sketching for the head. I just want something rough to be in there. And then the shape of the torso, I don't want it to be a perfect box. So I'm probably gonna give some roundness to the shoulders here, and then maybe come out just slightly around the base and then back up and around. Roughly, that's serving its purpose. The legs, I do know that I want those to be pretty much boxy rectangles. So I'm just gonna use the rectangle tool to make a rectangle that size. And that's gonna need to go down about to the halfway point of the foot, but we don't have to be too precise yet. And I'll just fill that in with black. And while I'm at it, I'm gonna go ahead and fill these ones in with black as well. And then I need the arms. So I'm gonna base this off of the legs. I'm just gonna Alt or Option click and drag this up, and we'll change the color to be just a lighter gray so we can see this overlap. And the arms are obviously not as long as the legs here. I don't want it to look crazy long and noodly. I'm gonna bring these arms back up to a more realistic height, and it's probably gonna come all the way up to here, and I'm even going to just round this off by clicking and dragging on the round corners, and that will round off all of those corners. But they're perfectly aligned to the leg, and that's what I want for this rig. They're the same thickness, and they're in the exact same x-axis. Now, one thing I really like about these designs is how large the hands are. They just look extremely big, and I think I'm gonna model my character's proportions off of that a little bit. So I'm gonna just duplicate this by Alt clicking or dragging that again, and then just bring it down a little bit further, and then I'm gonna increase the size of that hand. So it's just this big, bulky hand, and maybe I'll just round that all the way out and overlap it. So the hands are much wider than the actual arms. And like I said, I really like these Converse shoes, so I think I'm gonna give them the same style of sneakers. So I'm just gonna quickly sketch something like that out. And there we go. It's pretty ugly. Actually looks like my character has a ponytail, so I'm just gonna adjust this a little bit. Now it looks like they're wearing a hat. Doesn't really matter at this point, but the basic shapes of the character are starting to form. Now, if I hide my guides and the proportions behind it, we can kind of see a little bit more of a silhouette here now. This is obviously not what I want it to look like, but it's a good starting point for where joints are gonna be, maybe what widths the different limbs are going to be, and I can start refining it from here. So why don't I start with one of the legs, and I'll show you how I build a leg. So I'm going to just make a new layer, and I'm gonna label this R leg. And I like to label my things from the character's perspective. So if I had two legs, this would be the leg that's on top in the layer stack. But I'm just going to cut that shape out of there and go to the right leg and target it and press Ctrl-Shift-V to paste it in place. And then I'll shut off the other layer so I'm not distracted by it. This is going to be the basic shape of my leg in terms of its height. What I need to do now is break it up into a thigh and a calf so that I can rig it in After Effects for animation. So I don't need to do much to it, but I do need to make perfectly circular joints at the hips, the knees, and the ankles. So I'm gonna press L to switch to my ellipse tool, and then using my smart guides, I can start by clicking and dragging on that anchor point, and then moving over to the other anchor while holding Shift, and I'll move down a little bit so it's a perfect circle, but that way it's perfectly the same width as the rectangle. And from here, I can grab the center point and bring it up to intersect with the rectangle path. Now that circle is perfectly aligned to the rectangle. If I press Control or Command Y, I can see my outline view and see that that is nice and perfectly aligned. Okay, and then I'm going to duplicate this by clicking and dragging while holding Alt and bring it right down to the center of that rectangle, making sure that it overlaps with the center of the circle. And then I'll do that one more time to bring it all the way down to where the ankle will be, let go, and now I have three perfect circles on those joints. And from here, what I want to do is resize this rectangle so that there's one for the thigh, and then duplicate this so that there's one for the calf. What this is going to allow me to do is grab, say, the thigh and the ankle joint, press R to bring up my rotation tool, and then click on the center of this joint right here and rotate it perfectly around that point. So if I switch out of my outline view, as I rotate this, you can see that there's no seam showing up between these different shape layers, and that's exactly what we want when we go to rig this in After Effects. But this basic shape is generally how I design my character's legs and arms inside of Illustrator. And it's super flexible. Once you've set this up once, I could do something like, say, decide that I want to taper this a little bit so it doesn't look quite so rubber hosey. And I think that's actually something I want to do in this case. So I'm just going to use my direct selection tool and select the top joint, which encompasses those two top points on the rectangle, and then just switch to my scale tool by pressing S on the keyboard, click and drag while holding Shift, and just scale it up ever so slightly. I don't want it to be a lot on this character, but this way the hips are just a little bit thicker than the rest of the leg. And I want to taper out the middle section too, so I'll select that with my direct selection tool, S to bring up the scale, and then Shift, click and drag to scale that up so it looks like a straight line. I don't want to go too wide, don't want it to be too thin, just want to kind of make that a seamless line from the top of the joint down to the bottom. And I accidentally scaled that disproportionately, so let me undo and try that one more time. I'm going to scale that out right about there where the knee doesn't look like it's wider than it should be or skinnier than it should be. But now I have a tapered limb, which I can duplicate and modify pretty easily to turn it into, say, an arm. Now, just to make this a little bit more easy to look at, I'm going to start sampling some colors from my references, and I absolutely encourage you to choose your own colors for your designs. Don't just rip somebody else off completely, but just for the sake of making this simple and easy to view, I'm going to use this character's colors as a reference point. But with those shapes selected, I'll press I to bring up my eyedropper and shift click on that green for the leg, so I can actually identify this as my character's leg. All right, with that done, I'm going to duplicate this layer by clicking and dragging it down to the new layer button, and I'm going to call this our arm. And I'll turn my sketch layer back on, which I should rename sketch. And I should also save. If you haven't saved at this point, you're doing it wrong. I don't want to lose any of my work, so I'll save this really quick. And now that I have that leg duplicated, I'm going to make sure I have the whole thing selected and then click and drag this joint upwards and just align it with about the top of the torso there. All of this is very flexible at this point, but I'm gonna move it up there. And I'm gonna change the color to be, we'll just do this blue color of the t-shirt here, and then shut off the other layers and adjust the proportions. So this needs to be a lot shorter, obviously. I'm gonna grab all of these joints, and my layer's color is the same basically as the shape color. So I'm gonna change that by double clicking on the layer. And I'll just make it a light red color so I can see my paths a lot easier. Now where you put the joint is really up to you, but I try to put it pretty much in the center so that the upper arm and the lower arm are the same length. So I'm just gonna really quickly use a rectangle, if I can grab the rectangle tool, to just make a guide that goes from the center of that joint to the center of this joint. Change the color so I can see it. And it looks like my smart guides was actually smart enough to help me put that joint exactly where it needed to be anyway. So that's fine as is. I'm gonna delete that and compare this to the leg shape. So still pretty much the same width, and I like that. It has the very slight taper, which I think is gonna work out great for this character. So this is really the foundation of how I design my character. I just start adding in more and more detail, playing with the proportions. As I'm designing it, I'm looking at it now and thinking those arms are probably thicker than I want them to be. But I think the biggest considerations you need to make when you're designing a character to be rigged is making sure you have those perfectly circular joints so that you can rotate joints around without having any kind of seam showing up. And the stuff we've already talked about, it just deciding what kind of style you're going for. And I'm just gonna time lapse through the rest of this design process as it is pretty lengthy, but I'm doing the same thing. I'm just iterating, adding more details one step at a time, adding in those lines, and then using the stroke width tool in Illustrator to give the line widths some variation so it just has a better quality to it, adding in those harsh shadows on the neck and the arms, just to really flesh out this character design. So here's where I ended up with my character design, and I just want to walk you through a few things about it before we move into After Effects. First of all, let's grab my proportions guide that I started with and the sketch and just compare how those look to my final design. You know, the very most basic version of my character was very simple. I'm gonna make this just a black color so it's easier to see. I was just blocking out the basic proportions, and they changed a little bit, but that was a good starting point to base my initial sketch on, which was right here, and getting a sense for the scale of the hands and the limbs. I don't know what happened to my leg here, but even just the shoe and basic shape of the head. So I just iterated on this until I got to a point where I decided, okay, I'm gonna start picking colors and actually adding in some more details, deciding to taper the limbs slightly, the arms a little bit more than the pants. But I just continued iterating and adding more and more details. Getting facial features on there helped a lot. Without those features, it just looked like this, so it was kind of hard to picture what my character looked like. But adding in that eye, nose, mouth, hair shape, and the ear to carve out that part of the hair, as well as all these smaller details like the line work and the shading on a couple of these pieces, adding a little bit of a squiggly hair there on the wrist just for some more visual interest, and just fleshing out the design as a whole really helped bring the character all together, but it still stayed pretty true to my initial proportions guide that I drew. Now I have a lot of layers. I've broken up all of the facial features into their own layers. I don't think I'm going to be animating in any of them, but it is important to have them on separate layers if you plan to. But I want to focus on, let's say, the arm here, and I'll show you how I broke that up. So it's 3 different layers. The arm or upper arm is at the top, obviously. It has the cuff and then the rounded joint. The forearm also has that rounded joint and includes the elbow, rounded joint at the hand, and then the hand, once again, also has the rounded joint. So on all 4 limbs, that's how I've structured it, where the joints overlap with those perfect circles, and each layer has that perfect circle part of the joint with it. So if I turn on the thigh, you can see round at the top and bottom, the calf, round at the top, round at the bottom, and the shoe did not need that round part just because of the way that I had to build it to get it to rotate correctly. But it's important to have all of those shapes perfectly aligned. And now that they are, I'm going to just turn everything on really quickly and we can leave off those sketches. And what I want to do is grab all of those perfect circles. So I'm going to look everywhere that there's a perfect circle for a joint, and I'm just going to click, shift click, and I'm in outline mode, which was Control Y or Command Y on a Mac. And I just want to grab at least one copy of each one of these perfect circles, because a lot of them do overlap. I don't need all of them, just at least one instance for every one of these joints. And then I'm going to copy, get out of outline mode, and make a new layer at the very top and paste in place with Control Shift V or Command Shift V. And I'll change the color of all of these to just something bright and noticeable. These are going to be my joint markers, which will be really important inside of After Effects when I go to actually rig this up and set up the Duik structures. But now that that's done, I'm going to save this and we can jump into After Effects. And again, I'm going to time lapse through this whole process because it is very lengthy, and I have an entire tutorial dedicated to getting started with rigging in Duik, which just check out the card above and you can go watch that if you're interested. But let me walk you through what I did here in After Effects. Obviously, I brought in the artwork and then I created structures using Duik and aligned them to those joint guide markers so that they were right in the center of all those circles, which makes sure that everything rotates exactly where it should be rotating. And then I rigged it up using Duik's auto rig feature and cleaned up the controls a little bit. I can actually turn off these joint markers. I don't need to see those anymore. And I now have a working rig. If I grab the body controller and move it down, then the knees are going to bend, the elbows will bend, and I can grab any limb and move it around. Now, just like from the beginning, I was not planning on making this a complicated rig, so I can rotate the head back, I can rotate the neck back, but I don't have any hips controls or shoulder controls. I just want to be able to pick up the legs, rotate the feet, rotate the hands, and move the body around. Nothing needs to bend or be that flexible. Then I went ahead and did the Duik auto walk cycle just to see what that looks like, and then put it into a smaller comp, lowered the frame rate to 12 frames per second, and this is what it ended up looking like. This is all I wanted to do with this particular character rig, so I think I succeeded. This is exactly what I needed. None of these limbs need to be bendy or stretchy, and the spine doesn't need to curve at all. Just wanted this very stylized, kind of rigid, simple walk cycle, and that's what I ended up with. But that's pretty much my approach to designing a character that's then going to be rigged and animated inside of After Effects. Thinking about what the needs of this character rig are going to be, its range of movement, how we're going to view it on the screen, and what I'm ultimately going to do with it once I go to animate. Thinking about what style of character I want to design and pulling references from online and finding other artists and inspiration that'll help me decide what my character should actually look like. Obviously, I'm a big fan of the Eagle app, and I think that's a great way to be able to organize and search and just browse through all of that inspiration all in one place. But that's just one use for the Eagle app. You can obviously use it to manage your own design assets and pull them in to After Effects or Illustrator or whatever program you're working in. It's just a really useful tool, and I think you should check it out. Once you have those references ready, start designing and do iteration. Start with the body proportions and just get a sense of the scale of the character. Then add a little bit more detail, just roughly sketching it out, and then build on top of that, adding in more and more detail until you get to a final character design. Keeping in mind how you're going to be rigging the character and using those perfectly circular joints throughout the entire character wherever a joint needs to bend, so that it's going to bend exactly the way that you want to once you bring it into After Effects and ultimately start rigging. I hope that you found this overview useful. I know that I time-lapsed through a whole lot of it. The reality is this is a very long process, and I tried to cram as much of it into one video as I possibly could. If you're interested in learning my entire process of designing a character, rigging it, and animating it in After Effects, then check out my full-blown course on Skillshare called Character Rigging with Duik Bassel, where I show you my entire process and teach you everything I know about this subject. Don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel, leave a like, comment on this video, and let me know what you liked about it. And if you're interested in supporting more videos like this one, consider becoming a patron on Patreon. You can find a link for that in the description of this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.
It was fun.